asking the question on everyone's mind these days. What do you think about the Batman?
Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Batman: The Caped Crusader Season 1. So even if you're a casual Batman fan, you may have noticed the style and animation are very similar to the classic Batman the Animated Series. That's because they share the same creator, Bruce Timm. Warner Brothers asked Timm to develop a revival of the classic series, but he declined. However, he did realize he had unused idea from the original series that they couldn't show on TV in the 90s because that show was aimed at kids. But now that all those kids are grown up, we get to see these darker stories that Timm wanted us to see 30 years ago. So this show has always been intended to be a darker reimagining of that early series set early in Batman's career in the 1940s. It is also a very loose adaptation of Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Batman Year One, when Batman was still regarded as a myth by the underworld and Gotham's police force were all on the take. Elements of this story were adapted in Batman Begins, so we're going to talk about some parallels to that as we go along. Batman's uniform in this series is very reminiscent of his suit in the new Batman Adventures, but with longer ears and smaller gloves. It most closely resembles the original Bill Finger and Bob Kane designs of the character from the Golden Age. We begin with some thugs loading crates onto a truck, just like in Batman Begins, which was adapted from Batman Year One. Just like in the animated series, the biggest gangster in town is Rupert Thorne, who has been around in the comics since 1977. Both the animated series and this show are faithful to the original design by Walt Simonson. I loved all the small animation details in this episode, like how in the opening the camera stays fixed on this gun, or how later we see the POV through the windshield as it's being shot out. Timm does a great job of placing the camera in places that would be difficult to shoot in a live action film. This opening does a great job of showing us how the criminals see Batman as a mythological beast, while also showing us that he is actually human. The opening titles are much more subdued than the animated series. Although the painting stills of the opening do seem like an homage to the gorgeous painted title cards from the animated series. When Alfred and Batman are in the Batcave, this map of Gotham City is the same one from the original Batman Adam West show. Thanks to our editor Lee Mazzio for that detail and all the other details he's provided throughout the video. Barbara Gordon is reimagined as a public defense attorney in this series, which is actually a first for her in Batcanon, and she's facing off against Harvey Dent, who is running for mayor, just like he ran for office in Telltale series, The Dark Knight, and some other comic runs like DC Bombshells and The Batman Who Laughs. But you'll notice that the Gotham Police Department is the same one from the animated series. Now that series was set in a world with Art Deco architecture and 1930s and 40s cars, but also with high-tech supercomputers, or at least how they might have imagined supercomputers in the 1940s. While this series is very low-tech, with less of a sci-fi edge in this opening episode. When the Batman holds the fire inspector over the train, he asks, "What are you?" Which seems like a callback to another classic Batman Year One story. What are you? I'm Batman. Then we go to the Iceberg Lounge, which was Penguin's club from the comics, adapted in the Batman and the upcoming Penguin TV series. Notice how the sign on the ship is the classic Art Deco animated series title font. The Penguin has been reimagined as a kind of a mama crime boss, introduced singing the old standard Bill Bailey, "Won't You Please Come Home?" a song about a husband who keeps irregular hours and is always away from home. This was a very popular song in cabarets and nightclubs when men were typically avoiding being at home with their families. The top of the ship has the classic Penguin umbrella and top hat, which will later be revealed to be an artillery cannon, very similar to the Penguin's umbrella gun in the original show. A few of the crooked cops are Batman regulars, like Flash, the cop that Gordon beat the hell out of in the comic Year One. And there's Bullock. In the animated series, he was a hard ass, but not a crooked cop. Now I thought it was interesting that unlike in the Year One Batman and in Batman Begins, Gordon is already the commissioner, but he is very much one of the few honest cops on the force. Here's one example of how this show is darker than the animated series. In the original show, Batman would have saved the Penguin's kid's life, but here, that guy just dies. The new Batmobile is also very stripped down and more realistic. It looks like an earlier model of the one we see in the original series, more like a period car but with armor plating. When the Bat-Sub goes to the Iceberg Lounge, did you catch this skeleton in a trunk? Clearly, Mama Bird has been dumping bodies out here for a while, and the Bat-Sub is new, but it is very similar to the Bat-Boat from the animated series. And in this show, Barbara Gordon may not be Batgirl, but she does use a bat as a potential weapon. Penguin. In their fight, Penguin says,
"Well, I'll be damned, Virginia. There really is a Batman."
Which is referring to the famous letter from a newspaper editor reassuring a little girl named Virginia that Santa Claus is real. Wait, he is? Yes, Doug, there is a Santa Claus. Now, they also call him Dracula, and there actually is a Batman and Dracula trilogy where Batman becomes a vampire. I love that Batman did not even win at the end of this episode. Things are actually a little worse for Gotham than when he started, and the credits theme is very somber, more in line with Michael Giacchino's score for the Batman. Now let's talk about episode 2. Clayface is a fan favorite villain from the original series when he was a sci-fi shapeshifter, but this episode brings him back to his golden age roots. Oh, by the way, and I just want to flag that this show has a murderer's row of executive producers: J.J. Abrams, Matt Reeves, comic legend Ed Brubaker, and this episode is penned by Greg Rucka. Rucka is a mystery novelist who has written some of the all-time greatest Batman detective stories, and he gives us another great mystery in this episode. Gordon is teamed up with Renee Montoya, a character who first appeared from Batman the Animated Series. This series also reintroduced another Batman ally, Lucius Fox, who is now Bruce Wayne's lawyer and not a company man at Wayne Enterprises. I also want to note that just like in the animated series, Bruce Wayne uses his Batman voice when no one is around, because Bruce is the mask and Batman is his true self.
They let her go.
Indeed, sir.
And I also like that we're seeing Harvey Dent before he becomes Two-Face, just like we did in the original series. But in that show, Harvey was a good man and Bruce's best friend. And here, he's an opportunistic sleazebag. We also keep getting hints of his future identity. There was the coin flip last episode, and now there's this.
So I offered him double or nothing.
And this.
You'll want to be on my good side, Renee.
This episode introduces Basil Karlo, who is the original Clayface from Detective Comics number 40. The outfit he wears in this episode is also taken from his first appearance, inspired by Golden Age Hollywood actors like Douglas Fairbanks and Golden Age heroes like the Spirit. His origin is similar to his Golden Age story, where he kills his co-stars after not getting a role in a film. We see him starring in what looks like an adaptation of Poe's The Pit and the Pendulum, which of course will be recreated later in the episode. Alfred name drops Gloria Swanson, a famous silent movie actress, which shows that he's just a little bit older and has outdated taste. So Clayface's story in this episode combines his origin in the New 52 comics with his Golden Age version, as well as a little bit of the Matt Hagen version of Clayface from the animated series. In the New 52, Basil buys Renew You, a substance that would allow skin to mold like clay, to fix his face. Matt Hagen is the second iteration of Clayface who also uses the treatment and became the mud monster that we all know from the animated series. The animated series also had several episodes that were focused on show business and how show business would ruin people's lives. In this episode, we get lots of fun nods to the Golden Age of Hollywood, like how this actor appears to be playing Jack the Ripper in the 1944 film The Lodger. The scientist, Jack Allman's outfit, is the same worn by Bruce Wayne in Batman #1 when he was doing science stuff. And this entire fight is also lifted from the first fight against Clayface in the comics, where Batman and Robin fought him on the set of a movie called Dread Castle and actually fought him on stairs just like these. The fencing scene between Batman and Clayface mirrors the scene in the movie The Mask of Zorro, and that's the film that the Waynes watch in the theater the night they're murdered. Now, Basil Karlo's name also comes from a combination of Boris Karloff and Basil Rathbone. Karloff was most famous for monster roles like Frankenstein and The Mummy. And there's more nods to old Hollywood in the background here. The poster for Murders at the Wax Museum is an homage to the film Mystery at the Wax Museum, while this one is an homage to The Crimes of Dr. X. Batman saves the day by crashing through a skylight, a classic Batman move from the animated series, The Burton Batman, Dark Knight, and many others. And the final fight scene and set plays like Phantom of the Opera. This is a nod to Batman co-creator Bob Kane, stating that the character was partially inspired by the 1925 Lon Chaney Sr. version of the Phantom of the Opera. Episode 3 begins with the same Gotham Museum that we saw in the animated series, and this opening gave me what is now one of my all-time favorite Batman moments.
I mean, what do you expect, lady? It's the East End.
Batman, as Bruce Wayne, actually loses his cool in public, and the opening score of this episode follows the same tune as Catwoman's theme in The Batman.
Not that hard.
I'd love a set just like these.
And this episode introduces Dr. Harleen Quinzel, who was originally created for Batman the Animated Series, where she was originally the Joker's psychiatrist turned henchman. Now notice how Bruce Wayne is usually seen wearing a tan suit, which, is there to contrast against his nightlife suit. Now, turns out that Harley is actually a great psychiatrist who's able to work out pretty quickly that Wayne's life is a facade, which is just one step away from discovering his real secret. Now, as she tries to make him a regular client, we already see her sense of humor that's going to eventually draw her toward the Joker. She leaves him a smiling smiling face, and right here she writes, "See you next Tuesday."
Because next Tuesday is actually a holiday. Hilarious!
Catwoman lives at Luton Place, named after Valerie Luton, who was a deranged fan of Catwoman's in the comics. Catwoman wears her original Golden Age costume, which she also wore in the Batman Brave and the Bold series. The courthouse is not the exact same one from the animated series, but it is very similar. And when she testifies in court, it's also very similar to the episode Cat Scratch Fever, where Selina also is forced to testify in a court of law. Bruce Wayne is watching TV later, and at this point, a TV would have been a major luxury item that only the wealthiest people like him could have afforded. In the flashbacks, young Bruce is wearing the same clothes that he wore in the iconic cover of Batman Year One. And later, we get this amazing scene where Bruce, instead of caving into his fear by crawling into bed with Alfred, responds to his fear with anger.
I'm going to make them pay.
Here, they fight next to a sign that reads Clowder Industries, and a Clowder is actually the name of a group of cats. There's also a neat symmetry in this episode. As the Doctor is asking Bruce if he has any meaningful relationships, he meets the love of his life, Selina Kyle. Her Catmobile first appeared in Detective Comics 122 with a similar look, and Cat is what Catwoman was first called in the comics. And in the final fight, Selina fights Batman with the Black Panther. Now, Selina has had 2 Black Panthers over the years. Her first one was named Diablo, and then later she had Lover. And finally, guys, Greta for the win.
You owe me 3 years of back pay, so I'm collecting now. My cruise to the Bahamas leaves in an hour. Auf Wiedersehen!
In episode 4, we see the regular people of Gotham being afraid of Batman, which was also a deleted subplot in Batman vs. Superman. The police board calls him a Bat-Man, which is how his name was first written in his first appearance. The entire story, with the police trying to trap him, is taken from Batman Year One and was also adapted in Batman Begins. Just like in Year One, they try to draw him out with fake crimes. And in this sequence, I loved how the Batmobile actually sounds like a growling animal. And this high-speed chase is also very similar to the first chase against the cops in Batman Begins. Right here, we see Gordon leaning on the spotlight that will later become the Bat Signal. And here, Harley mentions a colleague of hers.
My old college professor, Dr. Crane, would say.
That, of course, is Jonathan Crane, who becomes the villain, the Scarecrow. The side villain in this episode is Firefly, who never appeared in the animated series, but he was in the new Batman Adventures. And Firebug is a different villain who appears in the comics. Firebug's costume does resemble Firefly's more than the character that he's actually named after. And Firefly was also played by Brendan Fraser in the never-released Batgirl movie. And I love the tiny detail that when he puts on his goggles, he can see the flames of his dreams. It's a great way to show his psychosis. So the final act of this movie is lifted from Batman Year One, when the police corner Batman in a burning building, which was also adapted in Batman Begins. In the comics, this event leads to Gordon trusting Batman because Batman saved a cat. Here, it's because they saved these kids together. Episode 5 opens with King Tut, a villain that was created for the Adam West TV show. In her opening scene, Harley asks out Montoya because, in canon, Harley is bisexual and Montoya is a lesbian. It's pretty cool that they're accepting of that lifestyle in the 1940s, but the show also happens to be colorblind. Although, Montoya did point out that Gordon was taking a chance on her by promoting a woman. Harley's costume is a spin on her original outfit from the animated series, and we also get hints of her personality that will later attract her to the Joker.
You've got to learn to laugh it off.
I also liked that the patients' costumes are all exaggerated forms of their main issues that they discussed with Harley. And here, this one says,
Puddin'.
which is Harley's nickname for the Joker.
Oh, come to daddy.
Puddin'?
Then we get these microfish, which are filled with Easter eggs, so stay with me. A rare flower found at the site of a proposed prison. This is from Poison Ivy's origin story in the animated series. March gives bizarre lecture could be a reference to Lincoln March, a member of the Illuminati group, the Court of Owls, in the comics. Here we see Boyle and Gothcore, and Gothcore was run by Ferris Boyle in Batman the Animated Series. This is an ad for how to get rid of the bats in your basement, paralleling the episode's storyline of the police trying to get rid of Batman. This one mentions Officer Wilkes, who was Montoya's partner in the animated series. Here we see carnivals coming to town, a possible hint that the Joker is arriving soon. Labor camp shutdown is from the underrated episode The Forgotten, where Bruce works in a hobo work camp. Hill/Reeves feud escalates. I wonder if this is a reference to Matt Reeves and Jonah Hill after he declined to play the Penguin in The Batman. Valestra associate skips town. Salvatore Valestra is a huge Gotham crime boss. Also, Stromwell charges dropped. Stromwell was a crime boss in the animated series and star of one of the all-time best episodes, It's Never Too Late. Here is a tabloid headline, Wayne Goes Wild, a book book called How to Stop Working and Influence People, a play on the popular book How to Win Friends and Influence People. And finally, scientist daughter killed in car accident. This could be laying the groundwork for a possible origin story for Mr. Freeze. We go to Arkham Asylum, which is a much nicer facility than the Gothic Castle from the animated series, which was actually a glorified prison. This version actually seems based more on the Dark Knight Returns version from the comics. Now, when Deming is escaping, he accidentally gives Harley her future code name.
I have a friend, Dr. Harleen Quinzel, who'd probably do it for...
Harley Quinn.
And I love the detail that even his straitjacket is bandaged like a mummy because, after all, he is King Tut. In the final fight, every single form of a bat is used, including Harley's mallet, a baseball bat, and a cricket bat. And finally, Renee is waiting outside of Hopper's Jazz Club. Now, this is a nod to Batman Year One, when Gordon was in Hopper's diner with his mistress Sarah. That, in turn, is a nod to Edward Hopper's famous painting Nighthawks, which was also similarly used as a corner diner in The Batman, directed by executive producer Matt Reeves. Episode 6 opens with a conversation about how Gotham's economy is failing the poor.
We had a government worth a damn we'd rebuild, pump some life back in. But instead, we get to keep the slums.
Now, this is setting up the episode's theme, that the aristocracy that once ruled Gotham is now haunting its present, and the way the elites are failing the poor in the present day. Gentleman Ghost was originally a Hawkman villain during the Golden Age, but he started to appear more frequently as a Batman villain in the mid-70s. He's usually headless, like the Headless Horseman. This opening sequence ends with the officer looking at the Ghost upside down after a car wreck, which seems like a nod to this iconic shot from producer Matt Reeves' The Batman. Much of the episode deals with Bruce coming around to believing in the supernatural. Alfred's quote here,
"There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio,"
is from Hamlet.
"There are more things in heaven and earth, Artemis."
Meaning that you have to believe what you see, no matter how impossible. And later, he quotes Sherlock Holmes.
"But when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth."
And according to Batman co-creator Bill Finger, Holmes was an early inspiration for the Batman. After his meeting with Lucius, he says,
"You have more than enough just sitting in that discretionary account you won't let me near."
Which of course is Bruce's Batman Fund. Now this could be foreshadowing Lucius's aid not only as Wayne Enterprises' financial advisor, but as Batman's armor and money handler, like he is in the Nolan films. We find out that Harvey Dent has lost the support of the unions, and in the headline we saw earlier, we saw that union dock workers were going on strike. Again, the common people of Gotham are rebelling against the elites. Now, in the animated series, Thorne was directly involved with Harvey's turn to Two-Face. After Harvey was pursuing Thorne legally, Thorne blackmailed Harvey, and during a freak accident, he gets the left side of his body burned. When Bruce is going through the library, he runs across the name Moldoff. Sheldon Moldoff was an unnamed comic artist on early Batman comics. He co-created Poison Ivy, Mr. Freeze, Batgirl, Batwoman, and Ace the Bat Hound. He's best known for his work on Hawkman, the original hero that fought the Gentleman Ghost. Kindly old librarian Jocasta New tells us that Bruce was always fascinated with books about knights and quests as a child. And remember, when children like Bruce suffer trauma, their emotional growth is often stunted at that age. So Bruce, at a young age, decided to make the criminals pay.
"I'm going to make them pay."
And as an adult, he has carried on his childhood obsession by becoming a Dark Knight in an ongoing quest for justice. The story for Craddock is new to the series. In the comics, he comes from a poverty-stricken family and begins stealing on the streets of England to make income for him and his mother in the 1800s. Although the way he dies is the same. In the comics, Craddock is hanged after being accused of sexual assault by Nighthawk. When they first meet, Batman is still dubious of the supernatural.
"I know who you're pretending to be."
In the comics, Bruce also doesn't initially believe that the Gentleman Ghost is a real ghost. In Batman 319, after fighting the Ghost in a prior issue, he believes that he's worked out the Ghost's magic trick only for him to vanish into the night. He seeks out the help of Lincoln Midnight, aka Papa Midnight, a rival of Constantine's, first appearing in New 52's Constantine issue 4. And later in the episode, he wears a comic-accurate hat and suit. In the final fight, Craddock possesses Alfred. Similarly, in Batman number 310, he kidnaps and hypnotizes Alfred. And finally, as Harvey's campaign flails, he throws a snow globe of Gotham City against this framed campaign poster, leaving a crack that foreshadows him becoming Two-Face. But it's also symbolic that he smashes it with a miniature Gotham City, showing how the city itself is bringing him to this low point, and then he'll destroy everyone in the city to get what he wants. Episode 7 shows us why it's so hard for Gotham to be clean, because when kind civil servants like Barbara Gordon try to clean it up, the city punishes them for their efforts. The guy who attempts to shoot James Gordon is Floyd Lawton, otherwise known as Deadshot, who is a Batman villain and a frequent member of...
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad.
Gordon has been the victim of an attempted assassination before in the comics during the Officer Down comic arc. Following what Batman and the GCPD believe to be his death, the vigilante and the cops team up and rain hell on Gotham City. It really shows how important Jim is, not only to Batman, but to the city itself. We learned that the bounty was set by Mueller, so in the New Earth comics, Joseph Miller was a cop brought on by Dr. Hurt. Now this was during a time when Gordon was not the commissioner. Mueller was Dr. Hurt's attempt to recreate Batman, and is generally regarded as Bat Cop. The villain in the episode is Onomatopoeia, a villain who only speaks in sound effects.
Dun, dun, dun.
And of course, the Adam West Batman show and movie were famous for placing onomatopoeia sound effects on the screen as literal images. This character first appeared in Green Arrow Volume 3, number 12. His skills are marksmanship, and he takes the costumes or masks of his victims as trophies. Also, have you noticed that Batman never calls his butler Alfred?
There's no answer, Pennyworth.
This is interesting because it shows that this Batman really does see Alfred as more of a servant, just like he did when he was a child.
And you're going to help me.
The cop who eventually turns on Barbara is James Corrigan, a GCPD officer who goes on to become the Spirit, the Spectre, following his death. Now, as the Spectre, he later joined the Justice Society of America. They hide out in Wayne Gardens, the development that Lucius Fox started to build last episode.
Going to build some single-family units, some low-income housing, a school, public park.
We hear two streets referenced, Wheeler and Nicholson could be a reference to Jack Nicholson, who played the Joker in 1989's Batman.
As my plastic surgeon always said, if you gotta go, go with a smile.
Barbara says that she grew up in Islesworth Hills, which is not in the comics. However, it could be a nod to the manor in The Dark Knight Rises, which was filmed in Islesworth, West London. Outside the home, we only see Batman through flashes of gunfire, which seems like a nod to the hallway scene in Reeves' The Batman. It's also interesting because gunfire created the Batman to begin with, so it's appropriate that it illuminates him here. And just like all good film noir, the episode ends with a twist, that Barbara was the real target, and we also have a bitterly ironic ending set to sad saxophone music. All of these are tropes in classic film noirs. Episode 8 begins with young Dick Grayson waking up Jason Todd at an orphanage. Now in the comics, these are the first and second Robins respectively.
Wait, Jason Todd has red hair?
Yes. Pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths, Jason Todd had red hair, which he dyed black to match Dick Grayson after becoming Robin. And even though his backstory appears to be different, it's really cool to see that Dick Grayson is still attracted to the carny life. After all, he and his family were originally trapeze artists in the circus. Later on, we also meet Stephanie Brown, the fourth Robin and later known as Spoiler, and Carrie Kelly is the Robin in Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, and she even uses her classic slingshot. The villain of the episode is Nadia Knight, aka Nocturna from the comics, where she usually doesn't dress like Wednesday Addams. In the comics, her brother is also known as the Night Slayer. Bruce is at the carnival with Julie Madison, a really early love interest for Bruce Wayne, first appearing in Detective Comics number 31. Then we meet Dr. Leslie Tompkins, who runs the orphanage. Now in the comics, and in the original animated series, she helped Bruce as a child, and she's one of the few people who knows that he's Batman. Bruce follows Nocturna into the Hall of Mirrors, and it's a neat way of showing his multiple selves that will become a running theme throughout these last few episodes. Now, I'm not sure if he let himself get beat up to preserve his secret identity, or if Waylon, aka the Killer Croc, was just too strong for him. When he gets back to the car, Alfred is reading a pulp novel about the Grey Ghost. In Batman the Animated Series, the Grey Ghost was young Bruce's favorite TV show and helped inspire his career as Batman. And the episode ends with the origin of Two-Face. Now what we see here is a mix of Two-Face's classic origin that was reinvented in The Long Halloween, where a criminal throws acid in his face during a trial. But this series adds in Rupert Thorne's involvement, just like in Batman the Animated Series. Episodes 9 and 10 are appropriately a two-parter about Two-Face. We begin with Harvey's dream, showing him as the newly elected mayor. Now the visual here is lifted straight from Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. Much like Citizen Kane, Harvey never actually wins office, and his own mistakes create his downfall. Now there's also many similarities in these last two episodes to the movie The Dark Knight. His bandaged face looks like Aaron Eckhart's in that film. The way he goes after Thorne is like Harvey going after Maroni in Dark Knight, and how he went after Thorne in the Two-Face two-parter in Batman the Animated Series. Also, when they load him up in the police truck, it's just like after Dent confessed to being the Batman in The Dark Knight and was later hijacked by criminals. And his first murder is a criminal, just like in The Dark Knight. There's another Dark Knight similarity though that's even more important that we'll talk about just a bit later. When he punches the glass, it symbolizes his fractured psyche, which is the main theme of this two-parter. Both Bruce and Harvey are struggling with their double identities. Bruce forces Harvey to go out to dinner just to pressure him into a confession.
Harvey Dent leaned on broken men all the time in court.
While Harvey can't keep his darkness bottled up.
How hard is that to understand? You
stuck-up little...
And later, Bruce lets the mask slip and loses patience with Harvey.
Don't start growing a conscience now, Dent.
We even see similarities in how they operate. In Batman's first scene, he fights the criminals by first knocking out the lights, just like Harvey does in Thorne's mansion. And at the end of episode 10, Bruce notices these differences and works to correct them, just to make sure that he doesn't end up like Harvey Dent. And this is why he finally calls Alfred by his Christian name.
Thank you, Penny. Alfred. Thanks, Alfred.
In the comics and in the animated series, Bruce and Harvey are good friends. Their backstory was retconned in All-Star Batman to show them meeting at a group home for troubled kids and then becoming lifelong friends. Prior to the retcon, they had been friends in college and acquaintances as Batman and Dent in several comic runs. At the dinner, Dent's dissociative identity disorder manifests and he shows his facial scars to the public. Now, though he's not multicolored, Harvey's portrayed in the same style as he does in his first comic appearance back in Detective Comics number 66 when he was introduced as Harvey Kent. Batman mentions the Narrows, an area of Gotham invented for the Nolan trilogy that is considered the worst part of town. This is where the Scarecrow and Ra's al Ghul released his fear toxin into Gotham City. Now there are lots of small nods to the number 2 in this episode. 2 bullets in this revolver. Zito plays 4 2s, and Batman sees double during the fight. And even though we don't get the classic Two-Face in this show, Barbara does give him his 2-headed coin, which is also a symbol of the rigged system that failed Harvey to begin with. And there's also another bit of duality here with people on both sides of the law implying that Harvey deserved what he got.
People don't get acid thrown in their face for no reason.
Guys don't get their faces melted off for no reason.
Batman says his number is Klondike 50127. Now, 555 is the exchange number given to characters in movies and TV shows because it cannot exist in real life. And 0127 refers to Batman's first appearance in Detective Comics number 27. Barbara says,
I thought you were going to tell me to leave a blue light on in the window.
A cheeky reference to the bat signal. And contacting Batman with the phone is also lifted from the Adam West series.
We think it's the Joker. Good grief.
Now the climax of this episode is also similar to The Dark Knight, where Harvey Dent dies instead of going on to become a master criminal. I think it's actually much more realistic this way. He takes a bullet for Barbara, enraging Batman and bringing him right to the brink of murder. Now as weird as it is seeing Batman hold a gun, he did kill criminals with a gun in his earliest comic appearances. But here he chucks it into the river because it's a symbol of everything he hates, like Frank Miller brilliantly wrote in a monologue in The Dark Knight Returns.
These are the weapons of cowards.
And we also see the seeds of Gordon's partnership with Batman.
If you're still around when they get here, I'll have to take you in.
This is similar to the comic book Batman Year One, when Gordon tells Batman that he can't even see him without his glasses, which is a way of letting him escape police custody. And how badass was this ending, with Batman letting Thorne know that he could kill him at any time, but instead he's chosen to bring him down the right way. And then we get that final tease of the Joker perfecting his laughing venom on his test subjects.
Perfect.
Guys, I loved this season so much. It's both new and a throwback to the original series. I cannot wait for season 2. And again, big shout out to Lee Mazzio, who caught so many of the comic book Batman references that are listed in this video. Thank you so much for co-writing. And guys, what did you think of the series? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.